Montpellier TV. I'm Kacey Culliney, and I'm here today at the Bookshop to meet British author Patrick Moon. The ex-lawyer ditched his busy London life to start fresh and ended up here in the beautiful Languedoc region, although perhaps not at its best today with the rain. 3 books later, I'm here to find out his story. Your most recent book, What Else Is There for a Boy Like Me, is a very different book to your previous ones on Languedoc food and wine. So perhaps you could explain to me how you got there with that book.
Well, in a way this is the book that started it all. I left the law when I was age 44, convinced that there ought to be time in life to do more than one thing. I was kind of at the top of my profession, there was nowhere else to go but carry on repeating myself until I was too old to work any longer. So I left, no idea what I was going to do next. Writing books didn't even feature. But I went to India for a whole winter to try and get all of that out of my system, to try and start from zero and reinvent myself. But while I was there, I was also trying to do something slightly different and catch up with a very talented, very promising young man from a very poor, primitive village in the desert who had really impressed me on a previous visit. And I thought that with a bit of help and encouragement, he could really get somewhere that's like it wouldn't be possible for him otherwise. So I was going back to see if that dream, if you like, could be turned into some kind of practical reality. So the title, What Else Is There for a Boy Like Me, is partly his story, what else could he do with his life, and it's partly my story, what else could I do with mine. Unfortunately, life is never simple, and although one of those stories might be counted as some kind of success, or I wouldn't be here today, the other is more complicated and ended rather less happily.
Okay, because this is a very, very personal account of yours. What can readers expect?
Well, it's not all doom and gloom. In fact, one reader emailed me and said, "Is it all right that I'm laughing so much?" There's plenty of comedy, but it's a very humane book. It's a very moving book. Even today, 16 years on, the story still upsets me. You know, I kind of say sometimes that I put my heart into the Languedoc books, but I definitely put heart and soul into this one. Okay. That's why it took 16 years to get sufficiently far away from it, to get it into a form that was publishable.
Yeah. And now the Languedoc books, Virgil's Vineyard and Arizat's Aubergines, very different subject matter.
Absolutely.
Interesting nonetheless, very interesting for people in this region. What have you learned about food and wine in this region? Gosh,
an immense amount, because the essence of these books, I mean, these were huge fun to write. In Virgil's Vineyard, I spent a year effectively work shadowing a young winemaker. Back then, he was just starting out, nobody knew him, only just made his first tiny vintage. Now he's one of the stars of the region, Virgil Joly. I was very lucky to have such a wonderful teacher. And we spent the whole year, not every single day, but he took me through every part of the process from pruning in January right through to bottling in December. So I learned an immense amount, and I learned, you know, I used to think lawyers worked hard. I rapidly learned that winemakers work a great deal harder. And actually for the second book, I was work shadowing a young chef, ambitious young guy starting out on his own. You know, he'd trained in the Jardin d'Essence here in Montpellier, but he was starting up his own restaurant and his wife, and there I learned that if winemakers work hard, restaurateurs, chefs work a great deal harder still. Okay. So, but I learned lots of practical stuff. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have quite a lot of land where I live up near Lodève, and I've planted a small number of vines myself, make an embarrassingly small amount of wine, but I try to do it all in Virgil's perfectionist way, even if it's on a tiny, tiny scale. And similarly, working alongside a chef, it really helped me conquer all those things that were scared of, like boning fish, for instance. You know, all the things that we try to walk away from really normally. But he taught me to kind of conquer a lot of those fears and learn a lot of those techniques. So yeah, I've become a better chef, and I've become in a tiny way a better winemaker.
And had you done anything like that before? I mean, what was your level of knowledge on wine and food, French food before?
Well, I've been a huge wine enthusiast ever since I was an adult, but I didn't have much idea how it was done, and that's why I wanted to find out and communicate that to the ordinary reader. So these aren't technical books; they're not reference books. It's just a blow by blow. God, it's hard work kind of book, And I came away admiring these guys so much more than I did at the outset. And the genesis of the book was that back at the beginning of the century, this region had just begun to turn itself from a quantity region into a quality region, and I wanted to find out how that had happened. So alongside this story of working with Virgil for the year, I was going out to meet the star players, if you like, who'd been mainly instrumental in that revolution, because it really was a revolution, and it's still continuing. I mean, back then I used to think I could just about know, even I hadn't tasted all of them, I knew who everybody was in the wine world, because it was a manageable number. Now every time you pick up one of the local wine magazines, another 6 domains have sort of started working every week. It's so exciting. It's such a huge region, such diversity in the wines that they make here. I mean, it's clearly, for me, the most exciting region in France, and I would say the world.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So do you really think it has come that far then?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think there's anywhere else where you can get the range of wines that you do here. So if there are restaurants which do tasting menus with matching wines. In most regions that would be pointless, because all the wines would be from the same grape. They would just be better or worse. Here they can be fundamentally different. So exciting.
What do you think the future is for Languedoc wine at a global scale?
Well, I think, my personal beef about Languedoc wines is that the local people here are too concerned about tiny little appellations, trying to distinguish themselves from their neighbours and getting a little name for a group of sort of 12 growers in one village. My personal feeling is that if this region wants to get known internationally, they have to concentrate on a handful of a smaller number of names which can gain international recognition, because nobody outside this region is interested in the tiny subtle difference between Minervois and Minervois la Binière or something like that. I think we have to simplify it, but the wines are certainly world beating.
Yeah.
It's just getting the message across.
And what do your French neighbours and winemakers think of a British man making Languedoc wine?
Well, they're certainly not allowed to taste it. I mean, I only make about 24 bottles a year, so this is for very, very close friends who are allowed to taste it. But I don't have the right to. I don't have any planting rights. I couldn't exploit it commercially. It's just a huge amount of fun. But more man hours go into a glass of my wine than go into some of the most expensive wines in France, because it's on such a tiny manual scale.
Yeah. And going back to your writing career then, what should we expect from you in the coming year? Are we going to see a food and drink sequel on the region?
I don't think a food and drink sequel on the region. Actually, there is a plan to combine, if you like, the Indian book with the how are these things done kind of Languedoc books. I am actually thinking about writing a book, first of all, which would focus on how a group of hotels in India functions. A behind-the-scenes book, rather like the restaurant book, behind the scenes in the kitchen, but combining that with going out and about and discovering how all the food products that we get from Kerala are produced, because so many of the spices that we take for granted, tea, coffee, pepper, chocolate, bananas, coconuts, all the side products of coconut trees. There's so much that comes from that part of the world. And I think there's a fascinating story to be told there.
So we'll be seeing much more of your love of India in the future.
I hope so.
Okay, thanks for joining us, Patrick.
My pleasure.